Hey everyone, welcome back to the Shea Station channel for a shorter, more reactive episode. No Jerry Blevins today, so I'm doing this one solo dolo. Jolly Olive here. And the Mets have made another move. This one a lot more significant than their Jose Siri trade. They announced last night that they have signed Frankie Montas to a 2-year, $34 million deal. That's a $17 million per year AAV with an opt-out after the first year, a player option. So a very player-friendly deal for Frankie Montas to likely be an anchor in this Mets rotation. So before we do a raw reaction, let's kind of figure out who exactly this guy is, because it's kind of been a very chaotic few years for Frankie Montas. For a while, he was a stalwart in the A's rotation, but was always battling some kind of ailment. From 2018 to 2020, he only made a max of 16 starts in any of those years. And then in 2021, he had his breakout season. He made 32 starts, which was tied for the most in baseball that year, through 187 innings, finished 6th in Cy Young voting with a 3.37 ERA, was a little bit worse the next year, good in his time with the A's, and by the time he got traded to the Yankees, there was poor performance and then injury, and then in 2023, he made just one appearance the entire year. So going into the 2024 season, he was kind of one of these wild card free agents that no one really knew where he was going to go. He ended up getting $14 million from the Cincinnati Reds, which when I saw that, I was pretty shocked, because that was going off his 2022 numbers very clearly, or excuse me, 2021 numbers. He ended up pitching, fine for the Reds, really tailed off towards the end of his tenure there, and then got traded in division to the Milwaukee Brewers. And this is, I think, the beginning of the Frankie Montas story with the New York Mets, because when he gets to the Brewers, a lot of things change for him. Now, Frankie Montas has always been a 5-pitch mix kind of guy, which is a good thing. If you're signing a starter to a lot of money, you want them to have different weapons in their arsenal. He threw 5 different pitches at least 10% of the time, which means those are all real pitches. There's no, experimental pitch in there. He's a 4-seamer, sinker, cutter, splitter, and slider. That sinker is going to be a key here, I think, because that's what the Mets have been targeting a lot with a lot of their recent pitching signings. But his most dangerous pitch is his splitter, which he induced a whiff percentage of 42.6% on. So easily his most effective secondary pitch, one that he goes to get whiffs. And the reason that I mention that is because when he went to Milwaukee, he started to use it a lot more. And if you go on his Baseball Reference, you can see his strikeout per 9 rate skyrocket once he switches teams. With Cincinnati, he had 93 1/3 innings with a 7.5 K per 9, which is not exactly great. You want to be around a 9, meaning you strike out at least one batter per every inning that you pitch. In Milwaukee, he was well above 9, an 11.0 K per 9 in 57 1/3 innings. Funnily enough, from August to the end of the season, which is when Montas became a Brewer and stayed a Brewer, his K per 9 rate of 10.99 was 6th best in baseball. And here are some of the names that he's right next to. Logan Gilbert, who is 5th. Blake Snell, who was 1st. He was ahead of the likes of Cole Reagans, Tarek Skubal, Zach Wheeler, Sonny Gray, Zach Gallen, like a lot of good names. So that is a pretty enticing thing. The strikeout potential of this starter, because we've been signing a lot of, ground ball dudes and stuff like that. So this is an exciting prospect. But the 4.55 ERA he had with Milwaukee is pretty true, because his FIP was around that mark as well. The strikeout potential, I think, is what we're looking at mostly here. So where you go after this is you look at the price tag, and it tells you a couple things. One, good for Frankie Montas, who's dealt with injuries and underperformance, to make, this much money in this area of his career. It's not exactly something I would draw up if I was looking at his ERAs and innings alone. But what this also tells me is that it looks like starting pitching is going to be very expensive this offseason. In fact, Matt Boyd also signed yesterday, this morning, with the Chicago Cubs, and he got $29 million. This was a guy that I believe was a free agent, a minor league free agent midseason signing for Cleveland last year. Was great in 8 starts, but those 8 starts got him $34 million. So when you look at someone like Frankie Montas, who's coming off his most innings pitched in a season since 2021, his most starts in a season since 2021, you're at least getting the innings value there, and you hope that you can enrich his performance just a little bit, like the Mets did with Luis Severino and Sean Manaea last year. Speaking of those two names, this one I feel is very reminiscent of Luis Severino, being that there you have a four-seam sinker guy. I feel like the Mets are probably going to make him lean on his sinker more than his fastball now, even though the velo is obviously there with Montas. He has a live arm, and I think they're going to try and make him, just a better version of himself on a deal that might appear as an overpay, because I'm going to be honest with you, when Luis Severino signed last year for, I believe it was $13 million, I got real scared because, he was coming off being the worst pitcher in baseball. That's a quote that came from his mouth. He said that he felt like he was the worst pitcher in baseball in 2023 with the Yankees. And then, he came along here and he had a great season for us last year and opted out of the qualifying offer. And it looks like he's going to get probably his own multi-year deal now, especially with the standard set by Montas and Boyd in the last 24 hours. So with this Mets offseason plan and the amount of money coming off the books, he's probably going to be our 5 starter. If I had to guess, I believe that the Mets are going to go after a bona fide ace and then maybe try and bring back Sean Manaea to be their 3/4 area, which leaves Montas as the 5. So if Montas is your 5, that's great. I mean, you can't really ask for more out of your 5 starter. 150 innings, an ERA plus around league average, and a guy with strikeout potential. Yeah, I'd sign up for that for, my 5 starter. And you know what? It's not my $17 million. So if the Mets want to pay, a more premium price to get the guy that they want at the back end, then I am all for that, because while David Stearns had his limitations last year building a bullpen, he did a stellar job building a starting rotation. So I'm inclined to trust him. Speaking of David Stearns' rotation in 2024, just some quick rankings for you guys overall. The Mets rotation ranked 2nd in opponents' average last year at 232. They ranked 5th in innings pitched at 892. They ranked 5th in home run per 9 at 1.04. So this is a rotation that had not a lot of expectations going into it, kept the ball in the ballpark, kept batters off base. They walked a lot of guys. We all know that, but they threw innings. And I think that this is what you're going to get with Frankie Montas, a guy that's not going to give up the long ball. He's going to get you some strikeouts and he's going to give you innings. Hopefully everything goes to plan there. So we've talked a lot about the good. Now we should probably mention some things that more veer towards the bad side, because Montas is not this perfect signing. There's obviously going to be some hitches in the road here. One of the more alarming things that I was looking at when I was, taking a quick glance over Montas' stuff here is that there was a pretty significant dip in his ground ball rate from 2022 to 2024. I'm going to skip over 2023 because he threw 1 inning. It's not really, much of anything to read into. For most of his career, from 2022 and prior all the way back to his rookie season, he hovered around a 45% ground ball rate, which is pretty good. That's kind of what you want if you're looking for, efficiency on that side of pitching approach. So with the given increase in his strikeouts, especially when he joined Milwaukee in the last 2 months of the season, his ground ball rate dipped to 38.8% with Milwaukee. And on the year, it landed at 39%, which is well below his career average. So I'm honestly, this kind of leaves me perplexed. I'm not sure what direction the Mets want to take with Frankie Montas. Are they going to make him this bona fide ground ball guy like they tried to do with Luis Severino with great results? Or are they going to try and make him more of a power pitcher, change his arm angle, his delivery maybe, like they did with Sean Manaea to enrich his strikeout potential? Because with the ground ball rate, you kind of have a known quantity there. Montas has been a ground ball guy throughout his career. He has 3 different fastballs to play off of his splitter. And you can get a lot of soft contact, which the Mets rotation was really good at doing last year. They were top 5 in that metric as well. If you want to make him a strikeout potential guy, the upside is very clearly there in this 2-month sample with the Milwaukee Brewers. But obviously there's chances to get hit harder when you're living in the zone more and attacking batters. So Montas is definitely going to be a project, which has me excited, but also a little worried, because I was just as worried going into last year with the rotation because of the amount of projects that were in it. But it's very clear that the Mets aced their first test, so I'm inclined to trust them a little bit more than I did probably at this time last year. And I honestly think a pretty good example of a failure in this department for the Mets last year was Adrian Hauser, who came to the Mets after a 2-point spike in his strikeout per 9 rate in his final year with Milwaukee, got traded to the Mets, was in this sort of swingman, long relief role, and we saw him just give up a lot of tattooed balls, man. Like, he was getting hit hard, especially towards the end, right before he got cut. He landed with a 5.84 ERA, negative WAR. His strikeouts dipped back below to his career average. There is evidence to the fact that this kind of thing can go wrong if the Mets, don't have, I guess, all their facts straight, or, in their pitching lab or whatever. But I am inclined to believe that the Mets see something that most other teams do not, and were willing to pay the extra dollar just to make sure that they got Frankie Montas in their rotation. And Frankie Montas definitely bet on himself big time when he opted out of his option for 2025. He had a $20 million mutual option with the Milwaukee Brewers, which I'm sure they would have been inclined to say yes to, being that it was a 1-year low committal deal that they could probably trade out of if things go awry. Montas declines that mutual option, takes the $2 million buyout, and then gets more money. So he bet on himself, got the multi-year deal. It makes me very seriously feel like Luis Severino is not going to be back with this team, because I thought there was a chance he could accept the qualifying offer, the 1-year $21 million deal, which is very similar to Montas' option. These guys were very similar pitchers last year as well. Severino declines it, and it looks like he's probably going to get a multi-year deal somewhere, because the starting pitching market, I think, is going to be very, very expensive for sure. And you want to know what else this Frankie Montas signing tells me is that Scott Boras' 2023/2024 offseason might have been a fluke, because he has 3 clients so far that have already signed big money deals. You have Blake Snell signing a 5-year, $182 million deal with the Dodgers. You say Kikuchi got $63 million over 3 years from the Angels, and now Frankie Montas getting his 2-year deal for $34 million. These are all Boras clients, and he's got plenty more, including obviously Juan Soto. And it looks like he's getting to work early, and he's not going to tell them to say no to any big time contracts like he did last year with guys like Jordan Montgomery, JD Martinez. So this is going to be a very different kind of offseason, I think, for Boras clients. And another Boras client, Pete Alonso. We haven't heard much about him at all this offseason. I'm very curious to see where his number currently resides and where it's eventually going to land. So with the Mets rolling into this offseason with somewhere from $170 to $180 million coming off their books, free to spend, this is basically going to equate to maybe 10% of what they spend this offseason, maybe even less. So I'm not sweating the signing too much. He's going to land at your back end of the rotation. Your rotation is going to look something like Kodai Senga, David Peterson, blank, and Frankie Montas, with guys like Tyler McGill, Jose Budo as insurance. So the Mets rotation is currently in a pretty healthy spot. They'll probably need a couple more pitchers, but you have to feel like that's coming. And in terms of their spending habits, I think the Mets are going to be throwing money at the guys that they want. I don't think they're pretty concerned about price tags. I think they're more concerned with finding the guys that'll fit this roster the best and paying them whatever it takes to make sure they are on the roster for 2025. So does that mean we might end up with some bloated contracts? Yes, we had, bloated contracts last year as well, even some that were off the team like Verlander and Scherzer. But in the end, Steve Cohen has made it very, very clear that he's not afraid to spend an absorbent amount of money to make the Mets as good as they can be. And I have to believe that Frankie Montas is a part of that formula. We'll see. Hopefully we get a career year out of him. The Mets have had a knack for taking former Yankees and getting pretty good production out of them. So I'm inclined to believe it might happen again here. But overall, a pretty harmless signing in my opinion. I would say hold your overreactions if you feel like this is kind of a bargain bin signing, because, this time in opening day last year, or second game of the season, I very heavily overreacted to Luis Severino's first start, and he ended up having a pretty terrific season for the Mets. You got to just wait and see, and we'll see what comes of it. My biggest thing, Frankie Montas, stay healthy. Make 30 starts, get 150 innings, do that part of the contract, and hopefully the performance comes along with it, but make sure he's on the field, because what this rotation can't take is too many injuries, because the depth will get thin pretty quick. But overall, a solid signing, a nice kickoff to the offseason for the Mets in terms of spending on free agents. I'm expecting a lot more. I think you should too. And hopefully this insight was good to help you understand a little bit more about Frankie Montas and what he brings to the table for the Mets. Thank you for watching this. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the Shea Station channel. More offseason content coming when the Mets make some more moves, and hopefully we'll have stuff to talk about soon. Until then, I'll see you next time.